Wow, you're so cool! The 7-year-old boy exclaimed enthusiastically, fiddling with a brand new drone given to him by his father. I agree, first class, his nanny Grace supported the boy. On a warm June morning after breakfast, businessman Adam decided to please his son Greg with a new toy. It was difficult to surprise the boy with anything. He already had board games, countless cars, various submachine guns, and much more. But since the boy was fond of all kinds of technology, the man's choice fell on a flying drone. Adam owned a profitable business. Accordingly, the money in the wallet was not small, and the man could afford to pamper his son with expensive toys and things. The drone Greg gave was the latest model. It had LED lights, as well as a camera that could shoot videos of excellent quality. The size of the drone was not small and clearly distinguishable in the air. Together with his son, having understood the instructions for the aircraft, the businessman also installed batteries in the remote control. Dad, let's fire it up now, Greg said. Son, I need to go to the office now. Mom also has urgent business, so Grace will help you launch the drone, Adam said. Well, the boy answered, it is always interesting and fun for me to play with her. The father nodded to his son with a smile. For a moment, memories of how the young nanny ended up in their family surfaced in his head. It was a pure accident that saved his son's life. On a typical summer day, a businessman and his son were walking in the city park of the area where they lived. Greg lightly kicked a soccer ball rolling in front of him. He managed to slow him down with his foot so that he would not roll away onto the roadway passing not far from the square. The boy concentrated on controlling the round object until he was distracted by a meme parodying people walking in front. Looking at him, the son of a businessman did not notice how his ball hit a pebble and changed its trajectory, rolling straight onto the road. Greg noticed the absence of the toy when the ball had already rolled off the sidewalk onto the roadway. My ball! The boy shouted. He managed to run only to the sidewalk curb when he felt that someone grabbed his hand and heard a woman's voice. Stop! You will be beaten. Taken aback, Greg braked at the very edge of the road, and a car swept past him at high speed. He did not even slow down and at the same frantic speed sped away further. The boy somehow came to his senses and, of course, he immediately forgot about the ball. Turning away from the road, the son of a businessman saw a beautiful young girl in front of him, looking at him with concern. After a couple of seconds, Adam ran up to them, who was walking at a distance of 3 meters behind his son. The fact is that a colleague called the man and the man had to solve an urgent issue on the go. Greg, are you okay? What happened? He began to question his son, first embracing him. In response, the boy only stared first at his father, then at the road, then at his savior. Then the businessman took his son by the hand and led him away from the road. Come with us, he said to the stranger. She nodded and followed her father and son into the park, away from the roadway. There they sat down on a free bench in the shade of a tree. By this time, Greg had finally come to his senses and looked with curiosity at the girl who did not let him fall under the wheels of a car. I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for saving my son. Now I am in your debt. Since my wife is often busy now, I have a business proposal for you. Namely, to get a job with us as a nanny for Greg, Adam said, seriously looking at the girl sitting next to his son. After the shock of what happened on the road passed, the businessman drew attention to the external attractiveness of the girl. She looked about 25 years old, thick long blonde hair, framing a pretty face with gray eyes, was collected in a braid. However, for a man, she was the one who saved his only son from death, and besides, he loved his wife too much. Interesting proposal, the girl replied. I love children, even though I don't have my own yet. And, I don't know how, but I'm very good at finding a common language with them. So I agree without hesitation. So, we will be friends with her? Greg asked his father. Yes, son. This lady will be your nanny, and, of course, your friend, the businessman answered the child. But first, let her tell about herself, what her name is, and where she comes from. With pleasure, Greg's future nanny answered. My name is Grace. I was born and raised in a small town, one might say, in the provinces. To be honest, my family is by no means wealthy, my parents and I lived in poverty. For me, such an existence has become morally unbearable. Seeing only hopelessness, I moved here, to the metropolis. Getting out of poverty on my own and helping my parents was what I wanted. This is commendable, the businessman appreciated her actions, then welcome to our family. I think it's time for us to introduce ourselves. My name is Adam and this is my son Greg. Thus, a simple girl from the provinces suddenly got a chance to achieve her goal. A wealthy family treated their worker with loyalty and respect. They did not allow themselves rude words, they never offended the girl, but at the same time they did not wear them on their hands either. The young nanny understood that the rich are her employers, and she is their hired worker. The girl also could not complain about the payment for her work. Her salary was enough for her own needs and in order to send part of the money to her parents in the province. Dad, when are Grace and I going to launch the drone? Greg teased his father. Now I'll call her, the businessman said, distracted from his memories, and dialed the girl's number on his cell phone. Adam and his son decided to wait for the nanny in the yard near the house. While waiting for Grace to arrive, Greg simply ran down the street, holding the drone in his outstretched hand. The girl arrived pretty quickly and first of all said hello to her employer, then hugged Greg. Let's start it soon. I so want to see him fly. The boy jumped around the nanny. Greg, wait a bit. There is very little space in our city to launch a drone of this model. It can get stuck on a tree or the roof of a house, or fly into the road. Now our driver will take you out of town, where your aircraft will be able to show all its capabilities. Outside the city there is the space he needs and gorgeous views of nature. And this was prepared for you by your mother, so that you have something to eat during a walk. With these words, the businessman handed Grace a picnic basket, which contained fruits, sandwiches and tea in a thermos. Thank you, said the nanny and turned to her ward. Well, let's go and see what your drone is capable of. He nodded happily. Grace and Greg sat in the back of a luxury car with a basket of provisions next to them. The boy waved to his father from the car window with a smile. The man responded in kind and with a calm heart went to the office on business, knowing that his son was in good hands. On the way, Greg did not let go of a new toy, while talking about its advantages and features. The father read all this information to the boy on the box and in the instructions, and he remembered it perfectly. The child spoke so fascinatingly that Grace listened to him with genuine interest. To launch the drone, Adam advised to get to the village, which was located at a distance of 30 kilometers from the city. There is an excellent landscape for flights in the form of spacious fields and beautiful forests. During the trip, the landscape outside the car window changed from the urban jungle in the form of various buildings, billboards and pedestrian sidewalks to suburban green plains. Having given the nanny everything he knew about the drone, Greg silently stared out the car window for the rest of the journey. Grace followed suit. And now a village called Glenview loomed ahead. Attention of passengers on board, the driver said jokingly, we almost arrived at the place. Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah! The son of a businessman was delighted. For about 5 minutes, the driver was looking for a suitable place to launch the drone. Finally, they stopped near a spacious field, beyond which a birch grove was visible. "How do you like this place?" the driver asked. "Excellent," the nanny praised him. Grabbing a picnic basket, the girl got out of the car, taking a deep breath of the rural, flowery air. Greg climbed out behind her, clutching a drone. "Wow, how much space! Now let's fly," admired the boy. Grace patted the top of his head and stepped forward a little. There she noticed a large stump from an old felled tree. It was great to use as a snack table after testing with the aircraft. After setting up the drone, Greg pressed the launch button. Blue-red lights flashed, 4 powerful propellers spun, and the miracle machine soared into the sky. Since the child was flying the drone for the first time, its flight was a little ragged. The device periodically twitched from side to side, but did not fall. 3 times the boy launched and landed the aircraft quite successfully. The small screen on the drone made it possible to immediately view the recorded video. This is exactly what the nanny and Greg did during a snack. Deciding to launch the drone again, the rich man's son touched the coveted start button. Only this time, while trying to perform a steep maneuver, the boy turned the drone too sharply to the right and lost control of it. The device spun and fell somewhere behind the fence that was in the Trinity's field of vision. Well, he fell, the child was upset, he also got lost, probably. What we are going to do? Don't worry, I will definitely find your drone. It would be a shame to lose such an interesting toy, the nanny consoled the boy. Picking up a basket of food from the stump, she led Greg to the car. Then she turned to the driver with the words, while waving her hand towards the fence. "David, our drone crashed somewhere in that direction. Keep Greg busy for a while, and I'll go and look for the machine." The driver nodded calmly and let the businessman's son into the seat next to the driver's seat. The only entertainment that David could offer the child was games or cartoons on the tablet in the car. Greg was fine with that. Meanwhile, Grace did not waste a minute and went in search of a drone. On the way to the fence, behind which the aircraft crashed, the girl plucked several wildflowers. Having reached the place, the nanny read the inscription on the gate. It turned out that behind the fence was a rural cemetery. The blue paint on the metal railing was worn down from exposure to sunlight and rainwater. This gave the place a certain mystery and a touch of mysticism. As in any other, this haven of souls who went to another world had its own special atmosphere and mournful silence, which could not be affected by anything from the outside world. Entering the cemetery and closing the gate behind her, Grace looked up, remembering where the drone had approximately fallen. Having determined the direction, she went between the graves. Some of them were intact, and some showed holes that looked like wormholes. The silence had a calming effect on the girl, and thoughts were spinning in her head about how fleeting this life was and that every moment of it should be appreciated. Grace couldn't help but let out a sad sigh and then walked over to several graves in the direction where the drone had fallen. 2 of them were far from new and, judging by the dates engraved on the tombstones, the deceased old people rested there. But the most extreme, the 3rd grave, which was closest to the thickets of some bushes, was completely fresh. The name on the tombstone with a cross said that a guy was buried there. Judging by the data on the plate, this happened only 5 days ago. The words engraved under the date of death made it clear that the grieving mother of the guy could not come to terms with the loss of her son. It is understandable, it is very difficult for all parents to bury their own child, especially at such a young age. 30 years in total. Still to live and live. And you are no longer there, the nanny whispered, going up to the low grave mound. Having uttered these words, she placed wildflowers plucked from behind the fence on its top and added, "May the earth rest in peace for you." Then, shaking her head, as if shedding some kind of obsession, Grace looked around the place to begin her search for the drone. She noted to herself that a lot of grass and all sorts of weeds grew in the village cemetery. In addition, it was clear from the moist soil that it had recently rained here, which caused the grassy vegetation to grow almost to the waist. The fact that she was not mowed down, the girl was not surprised. She knew that the cemetery workers did not really like any side work and tried to put all the duties of caring for the grave on the relatives of the deceased. On this day, the weather was quite warm, almost windless, and green foliage swayed languidly on the branches of bushes. But, as luck would have it, the sun was at its zenith, the air warmed up a lot, and there was an unbearable stuffiness. It seemed that everything around was in an invisible jelly. Grace felt sweat break out on her neck. Removing her backpack from her shoulders, she took out a paper handkerchief and wiped the moisture from her neck. It got a little easier. How long will it take to find a drone in such thickets? The girl said thoughtfully. But I promised the child to come back with a toy. During the minutes that the nanny was at the cemetery, she did not meet any of the living people. Only a flock of crows flew over the trees at some distance from the girl. Grace moved away from the grave with a young guy, and was about to start searching for an aircraft, when suddenly a strange sound was heard somewhere nearby. She shuddered and looked around. But there was not a soul around, except for a couple of sparrows perched on a willow branch. Well, now everything is imagined because of the stuffiness, the nanny muttered displeasedly. Taking only a step towards the thicket where, according to her assumption, the drone could fall, she heard the strange sound repeat itself. No, it doesn't sound like birds chirping at all, Grace said aloud. In a second, the idea of what this unusual sound resembled from the outside hit her like an electric shock. God, it's a human voice, the girl whispered. At first, she seemed to be paralyzed. After all, the sound was heard from that very fresh grave. However, the fair-haired provincial was never a coward, therefore, having overcome her stupor rather quickly, she went back to the grave. Leaning over her, the girl listened and quite clearly distinguished a couple of phrases. I'm alive. Help someone. What she heard sent Grace into shock again. Of course, the girl did not think at all that the guy recently buried there could be alive. At the same time, she was a realist and did not believe in ghosts either. Standing at the grave, the nanny suggested aloud, maybe it's a double burial. It happens that another one is placed next to a dead person, only a little higher. Deciding that her theory was correct, the girl took a step back from the grave and looked around, hoping to see the cemetery workers. When the sound was repeated for the third time, she realized that she needed to act immediately and hurried to the gatehouse scene in the distance. There she was met by two brothers who had been working in this ritual office for more than a year. They were used to getting good money for their services and were never in a hurry to do anything for free. When Grace entered the lodge, the brothers only looked at her indifferently. Then the older brother asked, "What do you want?" "There's a dead man in the grave talking." The girl blurted out. "What are you speaking about? What else is dead? In what grave?" asked the younger brother, looking incomprehensibly at the stranger. Then the girl told the men everything from the very beginning. However, her story about the drone and the sounds coming from the depths of the earth did not arouse much interest in them. The reason for this was quite simple. Over the years of working at the cemetery, they have already managed to see a lot and are used to the fact that relatives of the deceased often invent all sorts of fables. Usually, in order to calm the mourners, it was enough for the brothers to take them to the grave and indicate the date of death of the buried, engraved on the tombstone. Then the living calmed down and peacefully left. They wanted to do the same with Grace. However, she did not let up and her perseverance crossed all boundaries. As a result, the gravediggers nevertheless surrendered under her pressure. After exchanging a meaningful look with his younger brother, the elder shrugged his shoulders and followed the girl, saying, "Well, let's go and look at your talking grave." Nanny nodded and went first. Her elder brother followed her, and the younger brother brought up the rear. But all three reached the mysterious burial place. Approaching the grave, the senior worker of the cemetery grunted and said defiantly, "Again this grave. She's kind of weird." For some reason, during the funeral, she was filmed on a video camera. "Well, what do we do next?" Grace was not at a loss and advised the man. "And you bend over the grave mound and listen." The cemetery employee grimaced, but he nevertheless followed the girl's advice. The younger brother did the same. At first, the eldest of them did not hear anything, but after a minute he made out someone's muffled scream. The gravedigger turned pale, but still managed to pull himself together and immediately took advantage of the situation for selfish purposes. "Yes, I heard something. But what is it? Possibly rats. Or maybe foxes wandering here from time to time. But this does not mean that we must tear up every grave on demand. Yes, and for free." Exactly. The younger brother supported the older brother. "Can you imagine what will happen here if it's so easy to start digging?" "Yes, we will run here for days with shovels, and time is money." Grace immediately understood the hint of the gravediggers and calmly said, "Wait, I'll be right back." And, moving away from them at a distance, she muttered under her breath, "They also bred corruption to me." When they reached the car where David and Greg were playing tablet games, the nanny briefly told the driver about the grave. What if there really is a living person buried there? Then he urgently needs help, and for those two, just give money. The girl summed up. The driver nodded and silently followed Grace. She led Greg by the hand a little behind her, since it was impossible to leave a 7-year-old child in the car alone. While waiting for the girl, the gravedigger brothers lit cigarettes each and stood leaning on shovels stuck in the ground. Here the younger noticed Grace walking back and pushed his older brother on the shoulder. "Look, there she goes. Who else is with her? Some kind of chiffonnier." When the trio approached the burial, the nanny pointed to the grave mound and two men with shovels. "David, it's here." But these gentlemen refused to help. Even from a distance, noticing a muscular, tall driver, the gravediggers became frightened. And after he looked at them with a stern look, they immediately began to dig themselves. Since the burial was fresh, it was not difficult to excavate the grave and it did not take much time. After digging and pulling the coffin out of the pit, the cemetery staff opened it. What the adults standing next to the coffin saw shocked them. There was a live guy in the box. He kept himself conscious with the last of his strength, groaning at the same time, and even was on the verge of physical exhaustion and dehydration. "God, you need to urgently call the ambulance and the police," Grace exclaimed and immediately began dialing the numbers she needed. During the removal of the coffin from the grave, Grace asked David to step aside with Greg so as not to scare the son of a businessman with what could be there. When the ambulance and the police were called, she approached the driver with the boy and told them, "Go to the car. Show the doctors and cops where to go while I finish looking for the drone." Grace until the last moment could not believe what was happening. Only when the representatives of the law and the doctors arrived did she accept the fact that it was all real. First of all, the paramedics put the young man on a stretcher. Since he was unable to utter a word and did not have any documents with him, those who were on the grave cross recorded the surname with the name. Doctors found no visible injuries on his body. There were no wounds, bruises, or fractures. The village police immediately took photographs of the scene, interviewed Grace and the gravedigger brothers. After all the actions necessary for the investigation had been done with the burial, the brothers filled the pit with soil, and the tombstone with the cross was pulled out to liquidate it. Before the called services left, Grace managed to find out from the doctors which hospital the guy from the coffin would be taken to. Then she was still able to find the drone, which had fallen into the thick bushes that grew a few meters from the excavated burial. Returning to the car, she gave the aircraft to a delighted Greg, and asked David to stop by a local clinic before returning to the city. After all, the guy she saved was taken there. At the gate of the medical institution, the girl said to the driver and her ward, "Wait for me here. I'll just find out how the state of that guy from the cemetery is." At the reception, she was told that the young man she had saved had been placed in the intensive care unit, and they gave the name of a doctor who could be contacted for all questions. Grace sought out a doctor and, after giving a brief account of who she was, asked about the young man's state of health. The doctor replied that he was immediately put on a drip and blood samples were taken. All further information will be known only after the results of the tests are received, the doctor summed up. Realizing that this was not a matter of 1 hour, Grace gave the doctor her phone number and asked him to call as soon as there was news about the boy's well-being. Upon returning to the city, the first thing Grace told about what had happened to Adam. "Today we are in such a situation. Don't believe." The girl did not miss a single detail, she even named the last name with the name of the guy that was on the cross. She remembered them very well. Ethan Jones? The rich man, who had turned pale, asked again, hearing the surname. "I know this person intimately. He is also a businessman and is quite alive and well. I saw him just the other day when I flew away on a business trip. He seemed to be buying plane tickets. And he did it in a hurry. It is unlikely that the same person can be in the grave and at the ticket office at the same time." Who did I find in the cemetery then? And rural? Succumbing to another shock, the nanny exclaimed. "Unfortunately, I don't know that," the employer answered her. "Only that guy can answer this question when he wakes up." Realizing that it would still be impossible to do something or find out until it worked out, the girl spent a couple more hours with the businessman's son and then went home. The next day was a day off for Grace, so she decided to visit the village hospital. Arriving at the place, the girl found the guy's doctor. "Hello. I wanted to know about the state of health of Ethan Jones," said the girl. "I can please you with the fact that he came to his senses. Only it turns out that his name is not Ethan Jones," the doctor answered. "And how then?" "Larry Wilson. You know what's weird? Our experts found in his blood faint traces of a potent poison that has a paralytic effect. I can also say that the proper autopsy was not performed on this guy, and in general, the burial itself was carried out in circumvention of all procedural rules. Apparently, someone really wanted to get rid of the guy in order to hide the use of poison. What room is Larry in now?" "He has already been transferred from intensive care to ward number 209. This is on the second floor, to the right of the stairs. Now it's time for the reception and you can go up to him." "Thank you. That's exactly what I'll do." Grace thanked Dr. Grace and headed for the stairs. Finding the right room, she knocked and entered the room. The room was designed for 3 patients. But at the moment, no one but the young man was there. He, noticing the girl who entered, calmly asked, "Hey. And who are you?" "Hey. My name is Grace. Thanks to me, you are now here, and not in the grave of the village cemetery," the girl answered. The guy was still weak and his reaction was not fast. The first thing he did was thank the nurse for saving him as she sat down in the chair next to the bed. Grace nodded her head and asked, "Do you even remember what happened to you?" How did you end up in that coffin? For a second, the guy closed his eyes, then sat up in bed, leaning on his elbow and taking a half-sitting position. I don't know what happened to me. The name on the cross is not mine. I'd been Larry Wilson for 30 years, not some Ethan Jones. And I'm not a politician and not a financial tycoon in order to take revenge on me for something or something like that. I am the most ordinary loader. It looks like I was drugged with something, the guy answered. How? And how did it happen? The nurse said thoughtfully. What? I don't know. And it so happened that I met a girl in the evening. I just finished my work shift. She offered to sit in a cafe and drink a cup of coffee. I, as a single person, had free time, so I agreed. This is the last thing I remember. Nothing else. Then I woke up in a coffin with makeup on my face. I felt it with my fingers. Of course, I began to call for help, although there was practically no strength. The young man completed the story. How so? The young nurse shook her head. Some people can't stuff another into a coffin for no reason and bury them alive. And you told the police about it? Well, about the girl, about the fact that you got drunk? Larry shook his head in response. No, he didn't. I don't like them, I mean the police. I have a suspended sentence in the past. And given for nothing. Since then, I have not had warm feelings for them. This, of course, is your business. But, I will not rest until I find out what's what in this case, Grace promised the guy and herself. Still, it's not every day that I save people from their graves. How long will they keep you here? About a week, answered the young man, and then they will let you go home to the city. Excellent. I think we'll see each other again, Grace said with a smile. Of course, said Larry, also smiling at the girl, if I know how to get through to you. Without objection, the nanny took a notebook out of her backpack and, tearing out a piece of paper, wrote her name and phone number on it. Then she placed it on the bedside table next to the bed with the words, "Get well soon." When the door of the ward closed behind the girl, the young man noted to himself that he liked this gray-eyed savior. Why not start with friendship, the guy said aloud, picking up a piece of paper with Grace's name and phone number. On her next working day, the girl decided not to pull the cat by the tail and start her own investigation, asking for help from the employer. However, Adam asked the nanny to wait until the evening, because at the moment he had urgent business matters that could not be delayed. The girl nodded in understanding and went to deal with her ward. Today, I suggest not staying at home, but going to the cinema, Grace told the boy. Hooray! Cartoons and Coca-Cola with popcorn are great. Greg was delighted. Then feet in hands and forward, the nanny clapped her hands. I'll call David for now. There were few visitors in the cinema in the first half of the day, so tickets for the cartoon were bought without any problems. After an hour-and-a-half session, it was decided to take a walk in the park next to the cinema. After eating one last popsicle, Grace and Greg got into the car, and the businessman's driver drove them home. However, Adam has not yet returned from work, so the nanny took up painting with Greg. An hour later the businessman came. His workday was over for today, so he could let Grace go home. Before leaving, she asked the man, "Do you happen to know someone in the police?" The businessman was surprised and asked, "What do you want from the police?" "You see, I want to know about the surname that was written on the cross. And also, why did they want to kill that guy and bury him under a false name? I don't believe it could just be a bad joke or anything like that." "Well, I can't refuse you. In the end, you saved my son not so long ago, and I don't forget good deeds," said the rich man. Yes, I have friends in the police. I will put you in touch with the right person who can help you. I'll call him now and make an appointment. You just have to come to the police station on the appointed day and time. Tell that person that from me, then there should be no problems. Without delaying this matter, the businessman immediately dialed the number of a police officer he knew right in front of Grace. Seeing the impatience of the girl, the man agreed that he would receive her tomorrow. Thank you, the nurse said with a smile. Adam just nodded in response. Grace, with a sense of inner satisfaction, went home. Spending the evening in front of the TV watching her favorite science fiction series, the girl mentally prepared herself for tomorrow's conversation with the policeman. Since such events with the burial and rescue of a person from it happened to her for the first time, the excitement periodically rolled over the young provincial. But then the next morning came and the nanny, throwing her backpack behind her back, went to the city police station. There, at the entrance, she was met by an attendant. "Who are you and on what issue?" he asked. "My name is Grace. I have an appointment with Oliver." The duty officer immediately dialed the extension number to contact the one to whom the nanny came to meet. After a minute, he hung up and, looking at the girl, said, "Please pass. Behind the turnstile, turn right, then straight along the corridor to room number 15. You are already waiting." "Thank you," thanked Grace and went towards the office named to her. Seeing the door with the right number, she knocked. Entering the office, the girl met her gaze with a middle-aged man sitting at the desk. "Hello. My name is Grace." "I'm from Adam," she said. Yes, I am aware," the representative of the law replied with a smile. Adam asked in gratitude for a good deed for him to assist you in every possible way, no matter what you ask. So sit down and let's get started. After Grace sat down in the chair opposite the policeman, he turned to her again. "So, tell me exactly what you need my help." The young nanny briefly outlined the essence of the event that happened to her, omitting the little things and focusing on important details. The story of the dead man from Glenview is on everyone's lips. The guy is very lucky to have you there. Through my channels, of course, I will make inquiries about the person you are interested in, but be prepared for the fact that it will take more than one day, the policeman immediately warned the girl. I understand it. In any case, until I find out why Larry was put in the grave, I will not be able to calm down. Just imagine yourself in his place. Looking into Oliver's imperturbable eyes, Greg's nanny said. Despite the fact that the man's gaze remained serious, the girl caught a spark of sincere participation in the situation in him. The representative of the law rose from his chair and held out his hand to Grace. In response, she did the same. After shaking hands, the policeman said, "I will do everything in my power to resolve your issue, dear lady. You won't be left in the dark." Thanking Oliver, the girl left the office and, closing the door, breathed a sigh of relief. Knowing perfectly well that all she had to do was wait for news from the investigator, Grace devoted all her attention to work. The good news was that Larry was due to be released from the hospital soon. The father of the 7-year-old ward of the girl also did not stand aside, promising to ask about Ethan Jones in his circles, since he himself knew too little about him. So the girl wondered what would happen first: a policeman would contact her, Larry would be discharged, or information would come from a businessman. The guy she saved was the first to make itself felt. Grace was just finishing her nightly cup of herbal tea to begin the process of getting ready for bed. She reached for her cell phone to put it into flight mode when it suddenly rang. An unfamiliar number popped up on the screen. Who could do it at a time like this? Muttered the nanny and touched the button to accept the call. Listen, speak. Greetings from the other world, the voice that sounded on the phone jokingly said. I think you recognize me and there is no need to introduce yourself. Sleep instantly flew off Grace and was replaced by a surge of vivacity. Of course I did, she said happily. How do you feel? When will you be at home? I was discharged yesterday, so I'm already in the city. I suggest we meet tomorrow. Do you love ice cream? Larry asked. I just love it, said the nanny. Only tomorrow afternoon I work and will be free in the late afternoon. It's nothing. I know one perfect place to meet. You'll like it. Until tomorrow, said the guy and hung up. At the same time, Grace had the feeling that an invisible interlocutor winked at her. Giggling, she finally fell asleep. The next morning, the nanny came to work with obvious enthusiasm. This did not escape the notice of her employer. Have you won at least $1 billion in the lottery? The businessman asked with a smile. What? No. Why would suddenly? Not understood girl. I just see that today you are in the mood for 5 with $1 billion pluses. So something inspiring happened, Adam explained. Grace hesitated for a moment, then briefly explained, yesterday, the guy I saved called. Said he was already at home. We'll see him tonight. That's wonderful, the man smiled. First work, then dating. By the way, I have some information about the person whose name was on the cross of the village cemetery. The nanny immediately became all ears, catching every word of her employer. I asked around in my environment and they told me this. It turns out that among the bigwigs of business, Ethan Jones was a mediocre businessman. Small fish, so to speak. He owned several points for the sale of spare parts and consumables for foreign cars. He was often noticed in the company of women, and constantly different. However, recently he was seen with the same girl, much younger than himself. That's all I was able to find out. I think a lot of new information on this case will come from Oliver from the police. Looking at the wristwatch with a large dial, the man added. And now it's time for you and Greg to study in the football section. Upon returning from there, you will need to study reading and drawing with him. With a short nod, the young nanny took the boy who ran up to her by the hand and together they left the house. The day flew by without noticing the fulfillment of all assignments. Wishing a good evening to her ward and his parents, Grace went to meet Larry at the place they had agreed. He was already waiting for her at the ice cream parlor. Noticing the guy, she slowed her pace to examine him. The young man had a thin figure, he could not be called short, and his dark hair was cut short. Coming very close, the girl was able to look into his brown eyes. After greeting each other, the young people entered the cafe and sat down at a table away from the entrance. First they discussed what happened to Larry, then the nanny shared what she had learned from her employer. After that, the couple switched to talking about everyday things. It was already dark outside and the evening lights were on when the young people left the ice cream parlor. Grace could not resist and took several pictures together against the backdrop of the building. She felt in her heart that she would meet Larry more than once. Exhausted from the day, Grace fell asleep as soon as her head touched the pillow. The last person who gave her a solid piece of new information about Ethan Jones was a familiar police officer, Adam. He called the girl the next morning. The nanny was just getting ready for work when she heard the cell phone buzzing on the bedside table. Picking up the phone, she heard the invariably serious male voice, Grace, hello. Do you want to know something interesting about your case with that burial? Then come right now if you have a few minutes of free time. Quickly shifting her gaze to the clock hanging opposite the bed, she replied, Yes, I have some free time before I have to appear at Adams. The girl herself did not notice how she got to the police station. She really wanted to know the solution to the events with the mysterious Ethan Jones. The duty officer was alerted to her visit and let the nurse through without question. Grace memorized the office number and where it was. So literally a minute later she was already sitting opposite Oliver. She first told the man what she had learned from her employer. Then what Larry told her about meeting a girl who invited him to drink coffee together. The representative of the law immediately asked, "Does this young man remember her appearance? Could he give a description for drawing up an identikit?" "Yes, in conversations with me, he briefly mentioned that he could recognize her," the provincial answered. "Then it makes things easier. I will share with you what I learned through my channels, and you will understand why the identikit of the girl who drugged Larry is needed." The representative of the law began. Grace paused in her chair, ready to listen. Before continuing, the policeman poured himself and her a glass of water from a cooler next to his desk. Finally he spoke. "So, I made inquiries and found out a lot of interesting things. It turns out that the man, whose name and surname were indicated on the cross, disappeared. Nobody has seen him for several days. The man seemed to just vanish. This seemed suspicious to me, and I checked his credit history. It turned out that before the disappearance he took a huge loan from the bank. And this is what this unfortunate businessman looks like." With these words, Oliver turned the monitor so that the girl could see the image on it. Glancing at the photo, Grace gasped and took out her cell phone. Opening one of the photos she and Larry had taken earlier, she placed the camera in front of the policeman. He, seeing the picture, pointedly nodded to the girl while still maintaining calm. Then he returned the phone to her and said, "Yes, the resemblance to the guy who was almost buried alive is striking. A little makeup and Larry Wilson easily becomes a double of Ethan Jones." "Grim!" the nanny exclaimed. "He told me that when he woke up, he felt the makeup on his face with his fingers. But I still cannot understand how all these factors are interconnected." "Oh, dear girl, there is a clear scam here. And your Larry got into this mess purely by accident. Apparently, that negligent businessman wanted to kill the guy and bury him instead of himself. An accomplices attracted his mistress. And the grave was filmed for collectors, since this Ethan Jones was not going to return the money taken on credit. However, they calculated the dose of poison incorrectly. That's why Larry woke up in a coffin. If it were even a little more, then the guy would be dead." The policeman finished the story. "But that's just speculation and speculation. There is no evidence." "Yes, and the perpetrators of all this cannot be attracted either, since it is not known where else to look for them," the nanny said bitterly in her voice. "Which is why a description of this Ethan Jones' mistress would be very fitting. Since his trail was lost, then, perhaps, through it would be possible to reach him," said the representative of the law. These words gave Grace hope that all is not lost and that justice will prevail. Nodding, she said, "You will have her sketch." On this conversation between two adults ended and the girl hurried to work. That evening, she wanted to arrange with Larry about a visit to the police. But, remembering his words about his lack of warm feelings for people in uniform, she decided not to push. She touched on this moment during their next walk. Of course, the proposal to go to the station to draw up an identikit of an accomplice of a failed businessman was received with hostility. For an hour, the nanny persuaded the guy to overcome his fears so that the perpetrators could be found and punished. In the end, the young man gave in, saying, "Okay, you got it. But only on the condition that you are by my side." To compile an identikit, Oliver took the young people to an employee who, according to Larry, made a clear portrait of Ethan Jones' mistress. Very soon their faces flaunted on all TV channels. These two are far from professional. In addition, they are not very careful in their actions. Sooner or later, one of them will make a mistake. That's when we'll arrest them, said the policeman. This was the nanny's last visit to the police station. Neither Grace nor Larry could influence the outcome of the investigation. It remained to be hoped that the identikit of the failed scammer would do its job. Soon the life of young people went back to normal. Grace still worked for Adam. Larry was able to return to his former job as a loader. In a short time, the two became almost inseparable. The girl herself did not notice how she fell in love with the one she pulled out almost from the next world. She was sure that Larry had similar feelings for her. So it was. It's just that the guy promised himself not to rush things and first get to know the girl better. Events at the village cemetery and after it became increasingly pale. They were replaced by pleasant memories of the time spent together. The friendship between Larry and Grace, which began so strangely and unexpectedly, gradually grew into pure and bright love, which grew stronger day by day. On the evening of the weekend, the girl sat at home in a comfortable armchair, slowly enjoying the sweets presented to her by Larry. On the box, in sloppy handwriting in black marker, was written a brief with love. The inscription completed one heart. Though simple, but from the heart. After eating another candy, Grace closed the box. Suddenly, the thought flashed through her mind that it would be interesting to know how the investigation with the fraudulent businessman ended. He was found or the search is still underway and stuff like that. Quickly banishing an inappropriate thought at the moment, the nanny brushed her teeth and dived under the covers. However, the higher powers seemed to have heard her unspoken question, the answer to which was already ready. Arriving in the morning to her ward, Grace listened to the instructions for the day. After that, Adam handed the flash drive to the girl and said sternly, "There are 2 videos. Oliver gave them to me under great responsibility. These are copies of the interrogations of the same Ethan Jones and his passion. You can watch them in your free time. Then give me back the flash drive so I can erase the recordings. All clear?" Of course, the nanny answered just as seriously. According to the law of meanness, this day dragged on like a turtle crawling along the sand in the desert. And all because these videos put an end to her mini investigation, and she wanted to watch them faster. Having completed all the instructions given by her employer, the girl literally flew home, took off her street shoes and inserted a USB flash drive into the system unit of a personal computer. It actually had 2 video files. After only a second's hesitation, the businessman's son's nanny turned on the first of them. It turned out to be the process of interrogation of the very disappeared, or rather, Ethan Jones, who had fled from the city. Without moving, she looked at the monitor and saw how the man sitting in front of the investigator denied everything to the last and denied his guilt. He realized that he would not be able to get out only after he found out that his mistress could not stand it and told everything during the interrogation earlier. Then he had no choice but a sincere confession. It was not long in coming. Tousling his overgrown hair, he spoke. "It's all because of her. Because of Kate. I cannot say that my business went without a hitch. Yes, there have been problems. But I kept afloat and could afford to party. I am an unmarried person and I do not see anything shameful in not being attached to one woman. Then I met Kate, that she. Devil. My mind seemed to be confused. I did everything for her financially, and she did not hesitate to take. So I quickly burned out and became bankrupt. Then this scam began with a loan and my alleged death. And it was necessary to make such a mistake with the dosage of the poison. This videotape ended with the signing of a confession paper and the imprisonment of Ethan Jones. In the second video, the passion of a fraudulent businessman was in the interrogation room. According to her condition, it was noticeable that the girl was on her nerves and would break down pretty quickly. And so it happened. Finally smearing the remnants of makeup on her face, she chattered. I met Ethan Jones by accident. Well, I liked him. So what? A handsome man, not even old yet. Yes, and single, not married, with money. It's a sin to miss this. How did I know that his feelings would blow his mind like that? I didn't want to marry him. For a while, everything was fine, and then his business died out. He did not come up with anything smarter than taking out a loan. But there was nothing to give. So I proposed the idea of imaginary death. I found a guy who looked similar in appearance, suitable for the role of a scapegoat, and it was not difficult to get drunk and make up. Yes, I filmed the grave. It was a way to get rid of the collectors. Here is the burial, here is the surname with the name and date of death. The plan was perfect if that idiot hadn't screwed up with the poison. Having blurted out all this almost in one breath, Kate fell silent and just stared at the table. Then she was taken away and the recording turned off. Pulling out the USB flash drive from the USB socket, the nanny immediately put it in her backpack so as not to forget to give it to Adam. Many different thoughts flashed through her head before sleep finally took possession of her. On the one hand, she felt sorry for young Kate, and on the other, she condemned her. After all, she only used Ethan Jones while he had money. Grace didn't understand how anyone could think of burying an innocent person in the ground without blinking an eye. The whirlpool of thoughts ended with the fact that Greg's nanny saw Larry's face in front of her, his charming smile, and remembered the feeling of happiness that she experienced being next to him. Over time, the history of the cemetery was forgotten. Grace and Greg have traveled to those places more than once to launch a drone. Only after the experience, they chose the territory closer to the village. The boy flew the aircraft better and better, so the drone didn't crash anymore. In that village, the son of a businessman made friends with several boys, which is why simple outings into nature turned into whole picnics. Several months passed before Larry proposed to his savior the idea of living together. How do you look at moving to the next stage in our relationship? He once asked a girl after visiting the cinema. What is it for? She asked. Move in with me. The apartment is not rented, but my own. There is enough space for the two of us. A tempting offer. I have nothing against. I can rent out my apartment so that it is not just empty. After 3 months of living side by side in the same living space, young people did not regret this step in their lives for a second. Since they both worked and were not with each other 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, by the evening they managed to miss each other. Friday night over a cup of tea, Larry somehow conspiratorially looked at Grace and, winking at her, said, "And I have a surprise for you tomorrow, so get ready." It is curious to shiver. The girl has smiled. Saturday came and the young man took her to a cafe. According to the price tag, it was not a restaurant, but not a bistro or canteen-type eatery either. The young people took a light vegetable salad, dessert and coffee with cream. As Grace took her last sip of her drink and placed her empty cup on the table, Larry said, "Now close your eyes and hold out your hand." Following the instructions of the young man, the girl involuntarily tensed. She felt Larry put a round object on her finger. "That's it. You can open it." The nanny heard his warm voice. Opening her eyes and looking at her palm, she saw that a silver wedding ring flaunted on her finger. The porter looked her straight in the eyes and asked, "Will you marry me?" "Yes, with great joy," the girl replied. The young man gave Grace his signature disarming smile, and her cheeks immediately flushed. Preparations for the wedding began the next day. Still being a modest provincial at heart, the girl planned a quiet wedding, although she dreamed of a ceremony on a grand scale. However, Adam offered to help the nanny, both financially and in choosing a good church for the marriage. He motivated this by the fact that her acquaintance with Larry was not quite ordinary. In addition, his wife and he himself loved to attend various banquets and festivities, plus the money side is not a problem for him. So the wedding of young people went on a grand scale. A wedding, a white wedding dress with a veil, a banquet, congratulations. This is how the girl imagined the beginning of marriage in her dreams. She was happy because her goal, set before herself, was being fulfilled. Indeed, in the metropolis, she was able not only to get out of poverty, but also met her soulmate. The businessman gave his employee a month for a honeymoon. His newlyweds spent in Turkey. There they literally disconnected from the outside world and enjoyed only rest and each other. Grace fingered a necklace of sea pebbles and pearls she had bought from a Turkish jewelry store. Turning down the volume on the TV, she decided to voice one idea that came to her mind after returning from vacation. "You know, here's what I was thinking. Since I love my job and I'm great with kids, why don't I go further than babysitting one kid? And what if you open your own development center for kids? It's so exciting. I could be creative with them, do crafts, attend various events. The idea is just great. But the question is, where will you get the start? Up capital for this, and will you cope with your plans?" Larry rubbed his chin. "I think, in financial terms, you can turn to the father of my ward. As a businessman, he is likely to appreciate the prospects of investments. I should be able to. I will find helpers. One is already there, and he is sitting next to me. I'm afraid I'll only be of use to you as a brute force. I prefer to be a hard worker and drag things from place to place. In any case, I fully support your idea." As Grace expected, Adam agreed to act as an investor in her idea. He considered it to be a promising and useful project. With his help, things went pretty quickly and the nanny carried out her plan. More than once the girl caught herself thinking that if she had not saved Greg, then none of this would have happened. Or maybe it would, but in a different way. But she wouldn't trade her happiness for anything.